active users on Office 365 and over 90% of the Fortune 500 using at least one Microsoft cloud service. So it's really important for any IT professional and business user to know what Microsoft offers from a cloud computing perspective. This course will focus on the basics of cloud computing by defining at a general level what the cloud is, why it's useful, and examine how the different Microsoft offerings fit into each type of cloud option. Some of the major topics that we'll cover include what is the cloud and why it's important, the different types of cloud computing, as well as what Microsoft 365 is and what services it offers. Of cloud computing. By the end of this course, you will know why the cloud is so important to today's businesses, as well as know the difference between public, private, and community clouds. We will also learn the different types of cloud computing services, such as infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, and software as a service. Lastly, we'll look at Microsoft 365 and learn what Microsoft offerings are available in the Microsoft 365 subscription, as well as every other Microsoft cloud service, such as Azure. This course is a beginner level, so there are no specific prerequisites before listening. I hope you'll join me on this journey to learn about Microsoft Cloud Services with the Introduction to Microsoft Cloud Services course at Pluralsight. Hello and welcome to this Introduction to Microsoft Cloud Services course. My name is Vlad Katrinescu and I'll be your instructor for this course. I'm an Office Services as well as a Cloud and Data Center Management Microsoft MVP from Montreal, Canada, and you can find me on Twitter at Vlad Katrinescu or follow my blog at absolute-sharepoint.com. In this first module, we'll take a high-level look at what cloud computing is and how it can help organizations around the globe. In this introduction module, we'll first introduce what cloud computing is and what are the advantages of cloud computing, and also look at the different types of cloud computing and where each one is more beneficial. By the end of this module, you'll really be familiar with what cloud computing is in general, and you'll be able to identify in which type of cloud a workload best fits in. Let's start by doing an introduction to cloud computing. Before cloud computing, if we actually look 10-15 years back, in each company data centers, we had a ton of servers. And each server had a different purpose, maybe running on a different hardware, and even with different operating systems. Each new application that you installed, the vendor required that their application ran on a dedicated server. Each one of those servers had their own CPU, RAM, and hard drive resources, of course, and each one of them needed enough resources for the utilization at peak time. But what this did is that on average, most servers were really underutilized, and organizations were spending a ton of money on hardware that most of the time was not even used at 10% of its capability. We then started to implement virtualization, which allowed us to run multiple virtual machines on a virtual host, so we're really able to get more usage out of our hardware and cut down space, cooling, and of course, costs. However, even with virtualization, we still had a few disadvantages, such as high upfront costs since we needed to buy really powerful virtual hosts, and then we needed to keep them for 5 years so they pay themselves off. We then still needed to pay for space in the data center, as well as electricity and utility costs for cooling and other server needs. Furthermore, hardware maintenance was still needed and is still needed in virtualization environments as disks can break down, network cards can go bad, and so on. Virtualization is really a lot better than dedicated hardware, so don't get me wrong, but there is still space for improvement, and this is where cloud computing comes in. Cloud computing enables companies to consume a compute resource such as a virtual machine, storage, or an application as a utility, just like electricity, rather than having to build and maintain computing infrastructure in-house. In a cloud environment, you have the cloud provider, which owns the data center and manages all of the hardware like servers, networking, and of course virtualization. As the cloud is fully built on the principle of virtualization, no client has ever direct access to the hardware, simply to a virtualized environment. All of those resources are pulled together and then shared to multiple clients that all consume the same hardware. Those clients do not need to know on what servers they run or how many servers their different environments are running on. They simply consume a service, and the cloud provider is the one making sure there are enough shared resources to handle everything. In a cloud environment, users simply select what services they want to use, with each service having a price per user or per minute of utilization of that specific resource. In a cloud infrastructure, this should really be self-service by the user, and the provisioning should be fully automated by the cloud provider and delivered in almost instant fashion. Now let's talk a bit about cost. In a cloud model, services are billed on demand by the minute, by the hour, or even by the second, depending on what services you are using. This on-demand billing allows organizations to create resources when needed and then stop paying for them when they don't need them anymore. This way, organizations can be more dynamic and cost-effective and reduce upfront cost. Since the money you pay for cloud does not get deprecated over multiple years, it's really a resource you use right away, the cloud cost usually goes into the operating expenses or OPEX instead of the capital expenditures or CAPEX. So this really allows you to deduct costs in the current year without needing to deprecate the hardware cost over multiple years. And this, depending on how your accounting is set up, and I don't want to get really into accounting details in this course, but this can have a really big tax advantage for your company. Here's an example of billing or cost for the cloud. Here we're calculating the cost of a virtual machine inside Microsoft Azure. First of all, I need to select the specifications of the virtual machine that I want. In this case, I'm selecting a virtual machine with 2 cores and 8 gigs of RAM. You can see right away the cost would be about 15 cents an hour. I can also select the operating system, in this case Windows. And because Microsoft owns Windows, the cost that I pay for this virtual machine also includes the cost for the Windows operating system it will be using. So I'm getting that license as a service as well. For the estimate, I can also choose how many hours I expect this virtual machine to be used per month. So if I use this VM for 730 hours, my cost would be $110 per month. And as you can see, in Azure, virtual machines are billed per second. So it's really flexible. Most cloud providers will also offer you savings if you prepay for a number of years. So let's say I know that I will need this VM for 3 years, I could save up to 55% of my computing cost, which would make sense if some servers are always up. Cloud services can also be scaled depending on demand and even automatically. In this screenshot, I have an app service plan in Azure, which is a platform in which you could host websites. I could enable auto scale on it. This way I can see, for example, when the CPU usage goes above 70%, add more CPUs or instances to that service. This can be really useful for public websites or different apps so you can pay a set amount at rest or when they're not used a lot. But if you have a peak or lots of people connecting at the same time, it will increase the resource only for that set amount of time. Something else that is a big advantage of the cloud is reliability. In a cloud scenario, the cloud provider takes care of the high availability and disaster recovery plans of their platform. Just to go over those terms so you see what the difference between those two is, high availability is usually to protect us against software and hardware failures. Those are usually very local, like a rack goes down, a server loses power, a service crashes, or something like that. On the other side, disaster recovery is something much bigger, like a natural or human-induced disaster, for example, a flood, fire, an earthquake that puts the whole data center down. The cost to implement a high availability in-house can grow really quickly because you might need a second data center on the other side of the country for which you need to pay servers, networking, utilities, and so on. So from a cost perspective, the cloud can offer a much better solution for a better cost. Now that we have looked at what the cloud is and some advantages, let's learn what are the different types of cloud computing, deployment models, and services. There are a few types of cloud deployment models out there. The first one, and probably the most popular one, is the public cloud, where you have a cloud vendor that provides cloud services to multiple clients. All those clients securely share the same hardware in the backend. A private cloud, on the other hand, is when the hardware is only used by a single company, which most of the time, but not necessarily always, also owns the hardware and data center. This is very close to the traditional data center model we always had, but in a private cloud most of the time, IT, which manages the data center, builds the different departments for the services that they do. Next up, we have a hybrid cloud, which is a combination of both a public and a private cloud with automation and orchestration between the two. And the last option is a community cloud, which is a shared infrastructure between several organizations with common security, compliance, and jurisdiction concerns. We often see the example of community cloud when governments from different countries set up a shared services division that hosts all of the IT for that government. Now that we have looked at the types of deployment models, there are also different types of computing services. The three main ones are infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, and software as a service. Let's take a look at what the differences are. What really differs between the deployment models is how much you manage versus how much the vendor manages. Let's start with on-premises, where it's pretty easy. You're the one that manages everything from storage to the data center to networking, virtualizations, and applications on top of it. Infrastructure as a service delivers cloud computing infrastructure to organization, including things such as servers, networking, storage, through virtualization technology. You, as the client, still manage the operating systems, applications, data, and everything really on top of the virtualization layer. Platform as a service provides cloud components to certain software while being mainly used for applications. Platform as a service provides a framework for developers that they can build upon and use to create customized applications. All servers, storage, and networking is managed by the third-party provider, while developers maintain the management of applications. Our last option is software as a service, in which you simply enjoy the service, pay a fee, but you don't manage anything at all. Everything is managed by the vendor. A majority of software as a service applications are run directly through the web browsers and do not require any downloads or installations on the client side. While this may seem a bit complicated to grasp at first, let's take a look at the same model but from a different perspective. Let's compare our cloud computing services to everyone's favorite food, pizza. Our on-premises model would be similar to
making pizza at home from scratch. You make your own dough, you cut your own toppings, you put it in your own oven, you pay for the electricity, and you eat at your own table. Our infrastructure as a service model is similar to getting frozen pizza from the supermarket and cooking it at home. You pay for part of the service, so you pay for the basics, the pizza dough, the tomato sauce, toppings, cheese, but you still cook it yourself, you eat it at your own table, and if you decide that you like it a bit overcooked, you can still get it a bit overcooked, no problem. The platform as a service is similar to pizza delivery, where the pizza comes to you already made and hot. You simply need to pour the drinks and then eat it at your own table. Finally, the software as a service is like dining out. You don't have to bring or make anything, everything is taken care of by the vendor. You simply pay the bill for what you consume. Hopefully, this comparison with pizza allows you to better view the differences between the different cloud computing service models. Let's take a look at some example cloud vendors and services in each category. For infrastructure as a service, some of the big players are Microsoft Azure, Amazon Web Services or AWS, Google Compute Engine, and Rackspace. Of course, the one in orange, Microsoft Azure, is the one provided by Microsoft since this is a Microsoft course, but I wanted you to have some third parties that you might have heard of to compare it with. In the platform as a service, some of the big players are again Azure with different services like Azure Logic Apps, Azure Functions, and things like that, Heroku, Amazon Elastic Beanstalk, and many others. In the software as a service, we're looking at Office 365 by Microsoft. Google has their Google G Suite, Salesforce, and Dropbox are other examples of really big software as a service vendors. Of course, those are just a few of the most popular ones, but there are hundreds, if not thousands, of examples of cloud providers, with the software as a service one probably being the most popular one.
Before finishing up this module, let's review what we have learned. We have done an introduction to cloud computing, which allows organizations to consume computing services as a utility. The cloud brings us multiple benefits such as rapid elasticity of resources when needed, and since services are billed per second, minute, or hour depending on the service, you can pay for services only when you need it, and also reducing that upfront cost of computer hardware. We have also looked at the different types of cloud deployment models, the public, private, hybrid, and community clouds, as well as the different types of service offerings, such as infrastructure, platform, and software as a service. This is it for the introduction module, where we really covered cloud computing in general. In the next module, we'll dig deeper into Microsoft 365 and Azure specific services and do an overview of Microsoft's cloud services. Thank you very much for listening, and I hope you found it informative. Hello, and welcome to this introduction to Microsoft Cloud Services course. My name is Vlad Katrinescu, and I'll be your instructor for this course. In this module, we'll do an overview of Microsoft's cloud services. We'll first do an introduction to Microsoft 365, followed by the different services inside Microsoft 365, such as Azure, Office 365, EMS, and so on. Finally, we'll see where each Microsoft 365 service fits inside the different cloud deployment models that we have learned in the previous module. By the end of this module, you'll know what Microsoft 365 is, what services you get with a Microsoft 365 subscription, and where you could leverage each service depending on your needs and requirements. Let's start with the introduction to Microsoft 365. Before we talk about Microsoft 365 specifically, let's take a step back and think at what Microsoft is known for. What do you think when you think Microsoft? The first thing is probably Windows, and I'm sure that many of you are watching this on a Windows operating system right now, such as Windows 7 or Windows 10. We also have the popular Microsoft Office, which contains Word, PowerPoint, Excel, OneNote, and so on, and those are used both on the consumer as well as the business side. But if we look at the business side more specifically, we also have Microsoft Azure and the Office 365 cloud platforms, and lastly, security and device management solutions such as Intune, System Center Configuration Manager, and so on. So what does this have to do with Microsoft 365? Microsoft 365 is positioned as a complete solution for your enterprise productivity needs. Microsoft 365 is a single subscription which gives you access to Windows 10, Office 365, which includes the Office client, and the enterprise mobility and security tools, also known as EMS. As Microsoft puts it, it's a single solution that gives you all of the tools that you need for productivity inside your organization in a single subscription. Let's take a look more in detail at each of those products. First of all, Office 365. Office 365 is a software as a service suite offering Microsoft's latest collaboration tools. It includes tools such as Exchange for emails, SharePoint for enterprise collaboration, Microsoft Teams and Skype for Business for instant communication, Yammer, which is an enterprise social network. It also includes the full Office suite, so you can have Word, PowerPoint, Excel, OneNote on your computer as well as in the browser, and multiple other tools such as Flow, Power Apps, Stream, Planner, and many more. Let's go to the lab and take a quick look at Office 365. I am now in the lab environment, so let me open up Chrome over here, and I have logged in the Office 365 portal. Here I'm a user that is licensed for Office 365, and if I go into Explore Your Apps, you see that Office 365 includes a ton of apps. I'll open a few of them in a new tab here. Let me go Forms, OneDrive, Outlook, Power BI, SharePoint, Stream, and as you see, there's really over 20 different applications. Most common ones, of course, we have Exchange Online, where I can use it to send and receive emails. I have SharePoint, which is my enterprise collaboration hub, where I have different team sites where I can add different files. I can have an intranet, I can have documents, and a bunch of other things. I have Power BI in which I can do my reports, Microsoft Forms in which I can do quick forms that ask people questions. So if I type employee satisfaction survey here, it might actually already detect what kind of survey I'm doing, propose me some questions. I'll just click on add all, and then I have a quick survey that I can send to people. Think of it as SurveyMonkey in a way, but in Office 365. I have Flow where I can create business process automation workflows. So here I have a holiday approval where people enter information in a list, it goes for an approval, and then does something if it's approved, and does something else if it's denied. I also have Stream, which is an enterprise video hosting tool. So think of it as a YouTube or Vimeo for your corporate videos. The really beautiful thing, and there's other courses on Pluralsight that actually go more in depth about what's included in Office 365, But what I really want to show you is that because Office 365 is a software as a service product, I don't really need to host anything or worry about anything. If I want to add a new user, let's call it Ben James over here. We'll say the username is ben.james at globalmantics.org. We'll do an auto-generated password. Then I simply pick a license. So let's say I'll give this user an Office 365 Enterprise E3 license, and you see all of the different services that get activated right away. I'll click on Add, and it took me just a few seconds to create this user, and now this user has a mailbox, has access to SharePoint, has their own OneDrive for Business with unlimited storage in Office 365. So that's the beauty in a way of software as a service. I simply add a user, add a license for that user, and I have all of those services included. Now I know I didn't really go in depth in this demo because the goal was really just to show it to you for a few seconds. However, there's a course on Pluralsight called Microsoft 365 Services and Concepts that really does a more detailed overview of every Office 365 service. So if you ever want to get a more detailed demo of each service, check out that course. Now let's go back to the slides and talk about other Microsoft 365 services. Next up in our overview of Microsoft 365 services is Windows 10. Microsoft 365 comes with Windows 10 Enterprise for each user, so you really have the best version of Windows 10 included. Even if it doesn't look, at least today, that Microsoft will release a new version of Windows anytime soon, by being subscribed to Microsoft 365, you'll always have access to the latest version of Windows available. Next up in the list of tools included is the Microsoft Enterprise Mobility and Security Suite, most often called EMS. EMS is an intelligent mobility management and security platform, and it helps protect and secure your organization and empowers your employees to work in new and flexible ways. EMS contains multiple tools for multiple purposes. For identity and access management, we have Azure Active Directory, and Microsoft 365 actually includes Azure Active Directory Premium, which gives you a lot of features not found in the basic version. We also have different tools for managing devices and apps with Microsoft Intune and System Center Configuration Manager. For threat protection, we actually have quite a few products that complement each other depending on what workload you're trying to protect. We have Microsoft Advanced Threat Analytics, Windows Defender Advanced Threat Protection, Office 365, and Azure Advanced Threat Protection. This is not all. I actually need to put a second slide because there's so many tools in EMS. We also have the information protection part, which is Office 365 data loss prevention, Azure information protection, and the Microsoft Cloud App Security that allow you to govern, for example, what kind of files can be shared outside the organization. What type of files can be sent by email? You could automatically block, let's say, patient records from being sent by email to an external recipient. So you have a lot of flexibility on how you govern your information. Lastly, we have the Microsoft Security and Compliance Center as an easy portal where you can manage security across the Microsoft 365 suite. Next up is Microsoft Azure. Microsoft Azure is an ever-expanding set of cloud services to help your organization meet your business challenges. There are multiple Azure services included in your Microsoft 365 subscription, such as Azure Active Directory and multiple others we have named just a few seconds ago. However, there are a ton of other services that you can leverage at a separate cost. Those services are a pay-per-usage model, so you can consume the ones you need for as long as you need. The advantage of leveraging Azure instead of other competing products such as AWS is that since you're in the Microsoft stack already, you can make sure that all of the services you use will really be integrated. When I said ever expanding a few seconds ago, it's because Microsoft Azure has been the cloud platform that probably added the most new offerings over the past years. And when it initially got released, it was mostly for virtual machines and infrastructure as a service, but now there are over 100 different services that Microsoft Azure provides, and only in the compute category shown in the website screenshot on the slides, you can see over 10 different services. So let's concentrate on the top two use cases and the most popular ones used in Azure. First of all, Azure Infrastructure as a Service, which is what Azure started with and probably still one of the most popular offerings. Azure Infrastructure as a Service, or Azure Compute, allows you to create virtual machines, virtual networks, and storage of all sizes and run the different workloads you might need in the cloud instead of needing to host your own services in the data center. As you might already know, Microsoft is a lot more open to other platforms those days, so it's not only limited to Windows, there's a wide variety of virtual machines, and including Linux virtual machines that you can use on those virtual machines. There's a wide array of operating systems that you can use on those virtual machines. Now let's go to the lab environment and see how we can create a virtual machine in Microsoft Azure Infrastructure as a Service. I am now in the lab environment and I have logged in into Azure with my Microsoft account that I already have a subscription on. As you see in the dashboard, I can see a few virtual machines and app services that I have and quick access to different portions of my infrastructure, of my cloud dashboard. Now, since we want to create a virtual machine, I'll go into create a resource and you see I can select some of the popular ones and I can also go and choose the category. Because we want a virtual machine, I will go into compute and I can select one of the popular ones such as Windows Server 2016 Data Center, SQL Server 2013 Enterprise, and even a Red Hat Enterprise Linux if I want to. In my case, I want to select a Windows Server 2016 Data Center, that's the VM I need, so I will select it, and then let's start configuring it. First of all, I need to select the subscription. So from what subscription, from what basically credit card you could say the money will come from. So I'll select this one that I have. I can select one of the different resource groups that I have created. Let me select client machines. I can create a new one. A resource group is a collection of the same resources that share the same lifecycle, meaning that at the end, if I want, I could put all of my test machines for a certain project in them, and at the end of the project, simply delete the resource with all of the different resources inside. So let me give it here Pluralsight course, for example, for the name. Looks like it's a bit too big, so I will just call it Pluralsight 1. There we go. In which data center do I want to host it? And as you see, because Azure has quite a few data centers, I have a lot of choices. But let me select East US. Do I need any infrastructure redundancy? I don't want any for this one. Which operating system do I want? It gives me the choice again, but I can switch to, for example, Windows Server 2008, Windows Server 2012, but I will stick with my Windows Server 2016 data center. And let me change the size. So I'll go into change size for my virtual machine. And there are over 196 types or sizes of virtual machines that I can choose from. So I really have quite a few options. So let me go and let me look for a medium-sized one. It'll filter automatically. Let's see what I have. Let me pick one with, for example, or I can even filter by price. I'll pick one with 8 cores and 64 gigs of RAM. So quite a powerful VM, and you see that this virtual machine would cost me $429.70 per month if I run it all month long. But it's okay, let's click on select. I'm not gonna run it all month because I'll probably don't have enough money in that resource for it to run. Let me now give it an account, so I'll put it Vlad as the username. Now I will put in the password. So let me try to get it right a second time. Perfect, the password do match. Then I can select what ports do I want to allow open or not. I'll just say that no public inbound ports will be open. Do I have my own licenses or not? In this case, I don't. But if you're an organization that already has an enterprise license agreement with Microsoft, and you already pay for your Windows licenses another way, you could save money on the virtual machine. But in this case, I'll say no. So I'm basically paying for the Windows Server license as part of my monthly cost. Next up, I can choose the disks. So do I want a standard hard disk drive, a standard solid state drive, or a premium solid state drive? But you see, depending on the virtual machine you chose, there is actually a column saying, will it support premium disk or not? And it said no. So you see, for this virtual machine, I cannot, but I'll select a standard solid state drive so it's a bit faster. If I want, I can add additional data disks. So for example, if I had a SQL server, I would probably want a different disk for the database files, for the logs, or things like that. But I don't need that in this case. Next up, for the networking, I can choose a virtual network that I already have, or select a new one, configure all of the IP information and so on, but we'll not go into the details because it requires a lot more background knowledge. Do I want to turn on diagnostics or not? Do I want to enable auto shutdown? So I can say that, for example, for this virtual machine, shut it down every day at 7 p.m. Let me choose Eastern Standard Time, or let me put it, for example, at 11 p.m. So I can make sure that in case somebody forgets this virtual machine open, it'll be shut down because it's a test virtual machine. So hopefully nobody will be still working at 11 p.m. And also send me a notification before shutdown at vlad@globalmantics.org. So in case I'm working that day, I'll be able to delay it or not. Do I want to back up the virtual machine or not? I'll say no for this one because it's a test virtual machine. Do I want to install any extensions, any extra add-ons? Do I want to tag it in a certain way to make it easier to view the billing? So I could, for example, tag it with a certain project or with a certain client. So at the end, I'll be able to filter and see how much the resources for that certain project or client cost me. Now I'll go into review. Let's review everything. I'll get this type of virtual machine. This is how much the virtual machine will cost me. And I can basically review all of the different details that I chose for that VM. Everything is good, so I will click on create. And then you'll see at the top right away, I get information about my deployment. Let's go here. You'll see that deployment is in progress, and the time it takes really depend on your cloud provider and on what resource did you want. If you want, for example, to simply create a disk, it might take only a few seconds. If you want to create, like I did here, a virtual machine that has Windows Server installed, that has quite a few cores and RAM, it might take a bit more. But even here you can see it live, the stuff that is creating. So it created the Microsoft, probably network adapter or network security group, the IP. Now it's creating the virtual machine. So it might take a few minutes, it might take up to, even I would say 1 hour. Usually it's a bit faster, but it might take up to 1 hour for everything to be ready. But for now, I will pause the recording and we'll let it finish, and at the end, we're gonna look together on how we can connect to this virtual machine that we have just created. So we're now back, and it actually took a lot less time than I expected myself. It took a grand total of 4 minutes and 3 seconds for our virtual machine to be ready. So now let me go into virtual machines here. I will see my Pluralsight 1 machine, so I can click on it and then I can click on connect. I will download the RDP file, so let me double click on it. We'll go connect. It'll ask me for my password, so let's go type Vlad. Let me type the password and try to get it right. I'll say don't ask again, let me open it. And as you see, I'm now connected in this virtual machine. If we go into Task Manager, we should have the 8 cores if I remember correctly. Let's do here, logical processors, 8 cores, and 64 gigs of RAM. So this is it. It only took maybe 15 minutes total, and we're able to deploy a virtual machine with 8 cores, 64 gigs of RAM, and Windows Server already installed in Azure. It was that easy. Another very popular part of Azure is the Platform as a Service part of Azure with tools such as App Service, Azure Web Apps, and Azure Logic Apps, allowing you to create apps and workflows and only focus on the code without needing to worry about the hardware, availability, and network in the back. Simply create your app and publish it worldwide on the Azure infrastructure in a matter of minutes. Now that we've seen the theory, let's go to the lab and take a look at Azure Web Apps, which is a great example of a platform as a service tool. We're in the lab environment, so let me open up the Azure dashboard and let's go here into our app services. From here, I'll just click on add and we'll get quite a few options that will allow us to get started. If you're more of a dev, you'd probably start with a web app or a web app with SQL, which is a database in the back. You also have the function apps if you want to set up a certain casual task or things like that. WordPress, Joomla, an ASP.NET empty web app, HTML5 empty web app, and so on. But I will select for this example something that we're all a bit more familiar with, which is WordPress on Linux. I will click on create. It will ask me a few information, so I'll call this one Carved Rock Fitness. Select a proper, let me select this subscription. I will create a new resource group and let me enter the database information here. Need to enter a password, so let me enter that. Perfect. I could select what type of database I want to pay for. 100 gigs will be enough for this specific demo, and let's click on create. It will take a few seconds for it to validate everything. Let's see if the Carved Rock Fitness is available. And as you see, validation is successful and the deployment has started. Service lab and take